Not everyone who smiles at you truly wants your happiness. Not everyone who calls you best friend wishes for your success. Some will praise you behind closed doors, then diminish you the moment someone else walks in. They'll clap when you fall, then pretend to advise you just enough to keep you exactly where you are. They won't use harsh words. They'll weaponize silence at the perfect moment. They plant tiny seeds of doubt, just enough for you to think you're too sensitive, just enough for you to ask, maybe it's my fault. The worst part is, you still call them friends. We often assume that pain comes from public attacks, but more often, it comes from those who once stood shoulder to shoulder with us, raised a glass with us, spoke words that felt sincere. They don't break you all at once. They shrink you, piece by quietly stripping away your confidence, your dignity, and your sense of worth. Stoic philosophy does not teach us to judge others. It teaches us to see clearly the nature of relationships and to respond with reason, not emotion. You don't need revenge. You don't need noise. You need only one thing: to stop giving others the power to hurt you. That is the strength you've always possessed, the ability to choose who enters your mind and your life. And to wield that strength, you must first learn to recognize them. 1. When support has two faces. There's a kind of person who never wounds you directly. They don't criticize loudly, don't openly dismiss you, and never say anything that would make others feel the need to defend you. They're smarter than that, more subtle. They make you feel seen when it's just the two of you, but once a third pair of eyes enters the room, everything changes. They don't betray you with overt actions, but through slight shifts in language, expression, or tone. And the frightening part is, only you can see it. You say something in a meeting, they don't disagree, but remain silent. You share a creative idea, they don't reject it, but pivot with a vague comment like, "That's interesting, maybe a bit emotional though." A statement just ambiguous enough to raise doubts in others, and just clever enough that if you respond, you'll be seen as overly sensitive. And so you start staying quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're afraid that every word you speak becomes a chance for others to question your credibility. I once had a friend like that. When it was just me and her, every word felt warm. She called me brave, creative, inspiring. But whenever I appeared before others, her presence cast a shadow. She spoke of me with a gentle voice, but always added phrases like, "a bit impulsive at times," or "inspiring, but not always practical." No one objected because on the surface, nothing seemed wrong, but I felt myself shrink not because of what I failed to do, but because of how she led others to see me. And the most painful part was how I defended her. I told myself, she's just being honest. Maybe I misunderstood, or she just wants me to improve. But no one who leaves you doubting your worth after every interaction should be called a supporter. A true friend doesn't make you feel like you have to work harder to be lovable. They don't leave you with an unspoken unease after every conversation. If someone only makes you feel safe when no one else is around, that's not friendship, that's performance. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If something harms you, it's not the thing itself, but your response to it that causes the harm." I've come to understand that it wasn't her words that exhausted me. It was the endless effort to explain, to forgive, to hold together a relationship that was quietly breaking me. What you need is not another reason for someone else's shift in tone. What you need is to trust how you feel. To trust the intuition that warned you the first time they fell silent, the first time they deflected your ideas, the first time you felt smaller in their presence. You don't need more proof to protect yourself from someone who shifts roles depending on the audience. They don't deserve your hatred, but you deserve distance. And that's where Stoicism begins to work like a filter, preserving clarity, removing noise, and reminding you that you never needed anyone else to validate your worth. Especially not someone who only praises you when no one else is listening. Some people love you only while you're still struggling. They're quick to smile, to cheer, to encourage when you're at the starting line, when you still need them, when your presence doesn't yet provoke comparison. But everything begins to change as you move forward. When you start attracting attention, gaining recognition, or simply standing taller than before. That's when their support fades into silence, or worse, into calculated, half-hearted compliments. I used to think success would make friends happy for me, and many did celebrate. But there was one person who only felt warm when I was hurting. When I was lost and searching, she was always there listening, sharing, telling me I deserved more. But as I began to stabilize, landed new opportunities, and grew confident in my path, she disappeared. No congratulations, no check-ins, just a strange silence, as if I had done something wrong. I didn't want to assume the worst. I told myself, she's probably busy. Maybe she hasn't heard. But then I noticed she only reappeared when I said I was stressed, unsure, or overwhelmed. She came back exactly when I felt weak, and always. That's when I realized that support was never truly for me. It was for the version of me that was easier to comfort, easier to control, the version that made her feel just a bit more important. Epictetus once said, "We were not born to please others, but to live according to reason." I've come to understand that genuine support does not depend on whether you're at your highest or lowest. A real friend shows up in both places with the same eyes and the same voice. But frenemies are different. They need you in a predictable state, not too successful, not too confident, not someone who makes them question their own reflection. And so, you begin to shrink yourself. You share less. You hold back your excitement. You dim your joy so others won't feel uncomfortable. But that's not kindness. That's self-betrayal, a form of quiet suffering in exchange for a relationship no longer rooted in honesty. Stoics do not ask us to become cold. They teach us to distinguish between kindness and compromise. When someone shows up only when you're broken and retreats when you're whole, that is not coincidence. That is strategy. And what you need is not to defeat them or to force a confession. What you need is to walk out of that gray space where you must keep shrinking to fit inside someone else's fragile sense of self. True support never comes from insecurity. It comes from generosity. And a true friend never disappears when you begin to walk into the light. 2. When advice is a mask for envy, there is a subtle form of manipulation, quieter than criticism, softer than insult, but sharp in its own quiet way. It shows up when you begin to believe in yourself, when you're about to step beyond your comfort zone and reach for something greater. That's when you're most vulnerable. And that's when they appear not to stop you, but to remind you to be careful. They don't say you're wrong. They don't tell you to stop. They simply offer a scenario that sounds objective. I just worry you'll be disappointed if it doesn't work out. Or, it's a cool idea, but are you sure the market needs it? That's risky. These words sound like concern, yet somehow, after hearing them, your excitement fades. The fire inside you dims not because you doubt the goal, but because they've planted a seed of doubt. They didn't douse your dream with water. They simply dipped their hand in before you could shield the flame. I experienced this before launching my first class. A friend I trusted listened to all my plans and then gently said, "What if no one signs up? This space is already saturated." She didn't criticize the idea. She showed no negativity. But her calm tone made me feel both overly ambitious and naive. I hesitated for another 6 months before I dared to begin. What's difficult is that you can't name this sabotage. It doesn't come from clear malice. It's cloaked in friendship, in realism, in being the one friend who says what others won't. But if you look closely, you'll see a pattern. They always show up right before you rise. And every time they plant a question that turns your head back. Are you sure you can do it? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Our minds are weakened not by outside forces, but by the voices of fear we choose to obey within." A Stoic doesn't plug their ears to advice. But they never allow anyone else to define their limits. They listen, but they never hand over the wheel of their life, especially to someone who doesn't believe they deserve to go further. If after a conversation you feel smaller, more hesitant, unsure of your decision, then it wasn't advice. It was a suggestion crafted to make you doubt yourself, to make you stop while thinking you're being loved. And it's precisely that ambiguity that makes it one of the most dangerous forms of manipulation. Sincere warnings make you sharper, stronger, more prepared. But warnings rooted in envy make you question yourself, and you don't even know why you've lost your drive. And here's what matters. You don't need to know for sure whether the other person meant harm. You only need to recognize how you felt after they spoke. That feeling is your compass. Trust it. Some advice is not wrong. It's logical, grounded, and appears to care about your safety. But the problem is, after hearing it, you don't move forward. You stay still. You lose your eagerness. You stop thinking big. You stop believing you're worthy of the next step. And if enough time passes, you begin to believe that stopping was wisdom, when in truth, it was the outcome of advice born from someone else's fear, not your own maturity. I once saw a friend give up a chance to study abroad just because a relative said, "That far away? Can you survive alone? There are good schools here too. Why go?" No one blocked her. No one denied her talent or effort. They simply suggested a safer alternative. And just like that, she stayed. But the saddest part wasn't staying in the same place. It was staying in the same belief that she wasn't strong enough to take full responsibility for her dream. Frenemies rarely push you backward. They keep you in place because they know. As long as you don't move forward, they don't have to face their own reflection. They don't need to compete with you. They just need to keep you in the zone where they feel safe, the zone where you're still preparing, considering, evaluating. In that zone, you don't make them feel small. In that zone, you still need their advice. And that's how they hold power in the sweetest way possible. Seneca once said, "People are not bound by chains, but by things that seem reasonable." The most limiting advice doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those you respect, love, or once trusted. That's why it carries weight. And that's also why you rarely resist. You obey not because you lack will, but because you don't want to hurt anyone. You think, what's wrong with stepping back for safety's sake? But you forget. Every time you delay because of someone else's fear, you rebuild the cage around your own life. The saddest part is that you don't realize it right away. You still think you're growing, being cautious, being responsible. But year after year, nothing changes. You remain the listener, the hesitant one, the person haunted by missed chances. And the other, the one who gave that advice, may still be in your life, still saying sensible things, still looking kind. But they never wanted you stronger. They just didn't want you to outgrow the version of you they were used to. And if you recognize that, you don't need to confront them. You don't need to argue. You just need to continue. Keep learning, keep doing, keep trying, keep believing you're enough. Not to prove anything to them, but to keep the promise you made to yourself that you will not live a life shaped by someone else's fear. A Stoic does not resent those who give poor advice. They simply refuse to hand over their life's direction to someone who cannot even steer their own. And they understand. Good advice is the kind that makes you see yourself as bigger, clearer, stronger, not the kind that makes you feel safe by staying in your old box. 3. When help becomes a silent debt. Not every kind act stems from kindness. Some forms of help are not given out of love, but calculation. Not to lift you up, but to keep you within reach. This kind of help is never harsh, never demanding, and never wrapped in control. It is gentle, subtle, and cloaked in what seems like genuine care. And that's precisely why it becomes a binding force, difficult to walk away from without guilt. You won't notice it at first, but through small changes, you'll begin to see. In the beginning, you feel rescued, cared for, supported at your weakest. They show up when you're vulnerable, reach out when you've got no one else, and make you believe this is someone who'll never leave me. But over time, you no longer feel free in the relationship. You start shaping your choices around their feelings. You hesitate to decline an invitation, feel uneasy when failing to meet expectations, feel guilty even when you've done nothing wrong. That's when the initial help stops being a gift. It becomes a quiet investment, and you, unintentionally, become the repayment. They never ask directly. They just go silent at the right moment. They gently remind you of what they once did. They don't say, "You owe me," but they let you believe it. And once that idea takes root, you start adjusting not out of affection, but from fear of seeming ungrateful. I've been there. That friend once helped me through a dark time, and I was truly grateful. But later, whenever I made a decision that didn't align with her expectations, she didn't argue, didn't scold, just said, "I didn't think you'd do that. After all I've done for you." And that was enough to make me feel I was in the wrong. I hadn't realized that help had stopped being a gesture of care and had turned into a quiet tool of influence, a form of soft power that kept me from living truthfully. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Do not use kindness as a tool to control others, and do not let anyone use kindness as a chain for your freedom." Stoics understand that gratitude is a noble trait, but true gratitude does not grow from pressure. It rises from inner freedom, from a willing memory, not from a sense of debt. If someone helps you but keeps the memory of it like an invisible mortgage, that isn't kindness. That's a veiled transaction. And in any conditional relationship, the balance will always tilt, and the one who gets hurt the longest is often the one with the most genuine heart. Remember this: help is a noble act. But if that help costs you your authenticity, then you weren't saved, you were captured. And in that moment, the answer isn't to fight. It is to walk away in silence, with dignity and with clarity. Some relationships are hard to leave not because of love, but because of debt. Not financial, and not even a specific favor, but an invisible debt born from a series of well-timed gestures: support when you needed it most, care when you were weak, encouragement when you were lost. And because of all that, you carry this unspoken rule: I must stay, bend, endure. Even when it no longer feels right. Even when you're no longer yourself. Frenemies understand how to use kindness like a double-edged blade. They don't demand. They don't set conditions. But whenever you think of saying no, they don't get mad, they just go quiet. They don't criticize, they simply say something from the past. "I just didn't expect this," after everything. A harmless sentence, yet powerful enough to make you bite your tongue. Enough to make you feel like the bad one. Enough to make you do what you don't want just to silence the guilt. I once held on to a relationship like that. This person helped me through one of the darkest seasons of my life. But after that, every time I did something they disapproved of, the response was never anger, but disappointment. A heavy silence. A sad look that made me feel like a traitor. I no longer dared to be honest. I couldn't say no. I couldn't choose differently because I always felt I was being ungrateful. What I failed to see was this. Real gratitude never demands that you trade your self-respect. Emotional manipulation doesn't have to be loud. It just needs a long pause, a deep look, a vague reminder of what I once did for you. And you'll step back, lower yourself, shift course not because you're forced, but because you fear being seen as disloyal. That is the most dangerous form of control because it doesn't come from dominance, but from what you once mistook for affection. Epictetus once said, "If someone gives you something but takes away your freedom, it is not a gift. It is a transaction disguised as kindness." The Stoics never taught us to be ungrateful, but they did teach us to stay alert. Kindness only holds value when it comes without expectations, without burden, without demanding a life shaped by guilt. And if you find yourself constantly repaying through self-sacrifice, if you can't choose freely for fear of letting someone down, it's time to see the truth of that relationship. Not everyone who once helped you has the right to hold you back. Not every good deed deserves your submission. A true friend helps once, then steps back. No reminders, no strings, no weight left behind. They let you live freely with your own choices. But if someone keeps bringing up what they once gave, perhaps it was never given freely at all. 4. When they can't celebrate with you. Success doesn't only test you. It tests the relationships around you, especially the ones you once considered close. Because light doesn't just shine on people, it also exposes the quiet shadows inside them. And sometimes, the light you've spent years creating is the very thing that makes them retreat, not because it blinds them, but because it forces them to see they haven't yet had the courage to leave the shade. Frenemies don't have to do anything obvious. They just have to react differently than you hoped. When you share a joy, they don't object, but they don't truly celebrate either. They raise an eyebrow. They change the subject. They nod lightly and drop a comment like, "Congrats, must be a bit of luck too, huh?" Or, "Sounds great, but quick success comes with pressure." They don't extinguish your fire. They just lay a soft fog over it, just enough to make it less warm, less radiant, less worth celebrating. I used to naively believe that the more honestly I shared my joy, the easier it would be for others to celebrate with me. But I've since learned a hard truth. Not everyone is willing to witness your success if it makes them feel left behind. Especially when you once started from the same place, shared the same dreams, endured the same early failures. And now, you rise while they remain. You are not at fault, but that difference alone is enough to awaken a jealousy they don't even want to admit. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "A free man doesn't need the crowd's approval to live rightly. He only needs to keep his soul as steady as stone, even when others turn away." That's a lesson I had to learn through the disappointment of realizing not everyone who once walked with you will walk with you to the end. Some could only stay when you were low, unsure, in need of their support. But once you stand tall, they feel their role slipping away. And instead of feeling joy, they go quiet. Or worse, they start making you feel guilty for rising too fast. If you notice that every time you achieve something, the relationship grows cold, don't rush to blame yourself for changing. Ask instead, were they ever truly with you? Or were they only comfortable with the older version of you, the one that hadn't yet touched what they still fear to dream? Don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Don't bend your joy to fit someone else's limits. If your success drives someone away, you haven't hurt them. You've only forced them to face their own delay, and you cannot heal that by making yourself small again. All you can do is keep walking with awareness, with humility, and with respect for the journey you've taken. Not everyone has the boldness to criticize your success outright, but many are skilled enough to do it under a more acceptable name: being realistic. They don't deny your win. They just reshape it, dull its light, make it feel less worthy of pride. And they do it with calm, as if they're helping you stay grounded, as if reminding you not to lose touch with reality. Frenemies excel at playing the rational friend. They never say, "You don't deserve this." They say, "Well, there's some luck involved too." They don't tell you to stop celebrating. They say, "Be careful, getting too confident too soon can lead to mistakes." Every word sounds reasonable. Every sentence feels like advice. But if you're sharp enough, you'll notice they always show up right when you begin to feel a little more confident, a little more radiant, a little more upright. And it's at that moment they appear to say, "Don't get too happy. Maybe you're not as good as you think." I once shared a personal project, freshly completed, full of pride and excitement, but the first friend I turned to replied with a single short line. Not bad, but finishing that fast, can the quality really hold up?" That was it. No praise, no excitement, no sign that they were truly happy for me. And the saddest part was that I immediately started doubting myself. I began to wonder if I had rushed it, been careless, or was celebrating too soon. All because of one realistic remark. Seneca once said, "We are not hurt by what others say, but by the way we let it echo in our minds." Frenemies don't need to say much. They just need to plant a phrase and let you repeat it on your own. What begins as a warning becomes your anxiety. What starts as a question becomes your self-doubt. And slowly, you steal your own joy quietly, but painfully. A true friend may remind you to stay grounded, but they never do it by casting shadows over your light. They don't pull you down to make you more humble. They stand beside you, silent when you need to shine, and only speak when you're about to walk into darkness. Frenemies, though, speak right when you're glowing to tell you maybe, just maybe, you should dim yourself a little for safety. If after every conversation your joy feels smaller, ask yourself, are you being taught to be realistic, or are you being held back by sugar-coated envy? And if you feel like you have to apologize for your own happiness, then that's not friendship, that's emotional entrapment. Stoicism doesn't teach us to stop sharing our joy. It teaches us to be wise in choosing who we share it with. Not everyone deserves to hear your good news. And one of the clearest signs of inner freedom is that you can celebrate your own victory, even if no one else claps. 5. Ending is not cruelty. It is self-respect. Some relationships don't break because of conflict. They break in silence. No one did anything blatantly wrong, yet you start to feel like you're no longer yourself when you're around them. You become more cautious with your words, think twice before sharing good news, and constantly adjust your emotions just to avoid a strange look or a half-mocking comment. You're not betrayed by action, but worn down by prolonged unease. Frenemies are masters at hiding behind seemingly harmless relationships. They never yell. They simply make you hesitant to be honest. They don't forbid you from shining. They just make you feel like you're bragging when you share something good. And slowly, you begin to shrink not because you've grown humbler, but because you're afraid of bruising someone else's fragile ego. Someone once asked, if the relationship isn't bad enough to cut off, why leave? The answer is, because you deserve connections that help you grow, not shrink. Like a shirt that once fit but now squeezes your chest and restricts your breath, keeping it on doesn't prove you cherish the past. It only shows you're not being honest with the present. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If something does not bring peace to your soul, do not hold on to it just because you're afraid of change." Those who truly love you won't make you feel like you need to dim yourself to be accepted. They won't make you question your light, won't make you tiptoe around their false sense of contentment. And if a relationship demands that you sacrifice self-respect to maintain it, then you must be wise enough to see, not everything familiar is healthy. Letting go doesn't always mean a full severance. Sometimes it's an internal act, a decision to stop hoping, stop pleasing, stop investing your precious energy into a connection that no longer nourishes you. It's not coldness, it's self-respect at its deepest level. There's a vague fear that many carry, the fear of seeming selfish for saying no. We're taught from childhood to be kind, generous, forgiving. But few tell us that kindness without boundaries won't make us more noble. It only makes us more vulnerable to manipulation, especially in relationships cloaked as close bonds but filled with comparison and quiet calculation. Setting boundaries isn't building walls, it's installing a door you can open or close as needed. It's when you understand you have the right to decline invitations that don't serve you, conversations that drain you, or friendships that leave a bitter aftertaste. Boundaries don't make you cold. They help preserve your warmth for where it truly belongs. Some won't understand. They'll say you've changed, become distant, aren't the same anymore. Let them speak. They react not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer predictable. They can no longer control your emotions with a glance, a half-joke, or a disappearance right when you need them most. When you begin to stand tall, those used to seeing you bowed will feel uneasy. Epictetus once taught, "No one can hurt you unless you allow them to enter your mind." Setting boundaries is reclaiming that control. It's when you no longer react out of anger, but act from awareness. When you stop explaining to be accepted and start choosing silence to protect your peace. Not everyone who leaves when you set boundaries is a loss. In fact, it might be a necessary filter revealing who stays for who you are, not for the position they held beside you. When you are strong enough to choose peace over appeasement, clear-eyed enough to say no instead of nodding just to keep things smooth, that's not hardness. That's maturity. And that maturity doesn't come from bitterness, but from a deep love for yourself. I used to hold on to relationships simply because of history. Because we used to be close. They once helped me. We went through hard times together. But then I realized, if a relationship makes me shrink, stay silent, self-censor, then no matter how many beautiful memories we share, it is quietly destroying my present. And if I keep it just to avoid being seen as ungrateful, then I am the one being ungrateful to myself. Some people left when I began setting boundaries. Some stopped texting when I no longer satisfied their emotional expectations. But I don't call that a loss. I call it the cleansing of the soul. As Seneca once wrote, "The wise man would rather be alone with clarity than accompanied by pretense." We don't need too many friends. We just need enough clarity to recognize who truly wants us to grow and who simply wants to keep us in the familiar box so they don't have to feel lesser. And when you dare to choose yourself, that's the beginning of freedom. If this message resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. And remember, those who truly deserve a place in your life will never make you question your worth. See you in the next one.